The night was thick with the scent of iron and damp earth, the forest floor trembling under the weight of unseen predators. Ow. The supernatural council had sent its hunters vampires with eyes like polished obsidian, witches with spells coiled around their fingers, and shifters whose muscles twitched with restrained violence. Their target, a rogue werewolf, one that had slipped through their laws, unregistered, untamed. Blood painted the trees in ragged streaks, remnants of a recent kill. The council's trackers moved like wraiths, their breath silent, their weapons gleaming under the fractured moonlight. They had hunted beasts before, feral wolves, rogue vampires, even the occasional demon. But this one was different. It left no trail of madness, only precision. At the heart of the woods, a lone figure crouched over a fallen deer, his fingers buried in fur and sinew. His name was Kale, though none in the council knew it. To them, he was merely prey, a lost wolf who didn't know his place. The first arrow struck without warning, piercing his shoulder with a wet thunk. Kale snarled, twisting as silver burned through his flesh like acid. Shadows erupted from the trees, vampires lunged, fangs bared, witches chanted, their magic wrapping around him like chains. A shifter, massive and snarling, slammed into him, claws raking deep across his chest. Blood splattered the leaves. Kale staggered, his vision swimming. He had never fought back before, had spent years hiding what he was. But the pain, the hunger, the rage, coiled in his gut like a living thing. Then the second arrow came, and something inside him broke. The air itself seemed to shudder. The hunters hesitated, their instincts screaming. Kel's bones cracked, his body twisting, expanding, but this was no ordinary transformation. His fur was darker, thicker, his fangs longer than any natural wolf's, and his eyes golden, burning with an ancient fire. The lead vampire took a step back, hissing, "That's not a rogue." Kel's roar split the night, and the hunt became a slaughter. The forest had gone silent, no chirping of insects, no rustle of leaves. Only the wet, ragged breaths of dying hunters filled the air. Kale stood at the center of the carnage, his massive form drenched in blood, some his own, most not. The silver-tipped arrows still protruded from his flesh, their poison searing through muscle and bone. But the pain was distant now, drowned beneath the primal fury coursing through his veins. The remaining members of the council's hunting party circled him, their confidence shattered. The vampire who had fired the first arrow clutched a silver dagger, his crimson eyes wide with something close to fear. The witches, their spells flickering like dying embers, whispered frantic incantations. The shifters, once eager for the kill, now hesitated, their animal instincts screaming at them to run. Kel's golden eyes locked onto the vampire, then he moved. One moment he was standing, wounded but unbroken. The next, the vampire was airborne, his spine cracking against an ancient oak. Kel's claws tore through his chest before he could scream, ribs splintering like dry kindling. Blood sprayed in a thick arc, painting the bark crimson. The witches unleashed their magic chains of fire and shadow, spells meant to bind and burn. But the moment the flames touched Kel's fur, they sputtered, as if the night itself recoiled from him. He lunged, his jaws closing around the nearest witch's throat. Her shriek died in a wet gurgle. The last shifter, a towering brute with scars from 100 battles, bared his fangs in defiance. He charged, claws aimed for Kel's heart. They collided in a storm of snapping bones and tearing flesh. For a moment, the two werewolves grappled, a whirlwind of fur and fury. Then Kel's teeth found the shifter's jugular. A brutal twist, a sickening rip hand. The fight was over. The shifter collapsed, his life pouring out in a dark river. Silence. Kale stood over the corpses, his breath ragged, his body trembling not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something older. The silver arrows clattered to the ground, expelled by regenerating flesh. His wounds closed before his eyes, the skin knitting together as if commanded by an unseen force. The forest itself seemed to bow around him, the wind carrying a whisper alpha. And then, from the shadows, a new presence emerged. A figure cloaked in moonlight, watching, waiting. Kale snarled, his instincts flaring, but the stranger did not flee. Instead, he knelt. At last the figure murmured, voice thick with reverence. "The blood moon prince has risen." The scent of blood hung thick in the air, clinging to Kel's fur like a second skin. His body still thrummed with the aftermath of the slaughter, every muscle coiled tight, every nerve alight with a fire he didn't yet understand. The stranger knelt before him, head bowed, but Kel's instincts screamed danger. A low growl rumbled in his chest, vibrating through the earth beneath his claws. The kneeling figure didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted his head, revealing eyes that glowed like embers in the dark eyes that mirrored Kel's own. "You don't know what you are," the stranger said, his voice rough with reverence. "But the blood knows. The moon knows." Kel's vision pulsed, gold bleeding into red. Memories that weren't his own flickered at the edges of his mind, battles fought centuries ago. Howls that shook the foundations of mountains, a lineage drenched in war and glory. His claws dug into the dirt, his skull splitting with the weight of it. Then pain, white-hot searing, as if his bones were being reforged in the heart of a star. His back arched, tendons snapping and reforming, his howl tearing through the night like a blade. The stranger watched, unflinching, as Kel's body changed. His fur darkened to the shade of spilled ink, his muscles swelling with power that made his previous form seem feeble. His claws lengthened, curved like scythes, and when he snarled, the sound carried something ancient, something that made the trees themselves shudder. The stranger's breath hitched. The blood moon prince. Kel's mind cleared, the haze of rage replaced by something colder, sharper. He could feel the forest around him, the pulse of every creature. The whisper of the wind, the distant, panicked heartbeats of the council's reinforcements closing in. They would come, would try to kill him, and he would break them. The first wave arrived in a storm of snarls and silver. Vampires lunged from the shadows, blades glinting. Shifters, larger than the last, charged with teeth bared. Witches hurled curses that blackened the air. Kale met them with a fury that shook the earth. The vampire's head left its shoulders before the creature could blink. A shifter's spine snapped between Kel's jaws like kindling. The witch's spells fizzled against his hide, their magic useless against the blood of an alpha. The last attacker, a witch with eyes full of terror, raised trembling hands. "Please." Kale silenced her with a swipe of his claws. Silence fell. The stranger stepped forward, his gaze burning with something like triumph. Now he murmured, "The real war begins." The scent of death clung to Kal's fur as the last of the council's hunters fell silent. His massive chest heaved, steam rising from his blood-soaked muzzle in the cold night air. The stranger, now revealed as a weathered werewolf elder with scars, mapping centuries of survival, watched him with eyes that burned with knowing. Beneath Kel's paws, the earth pulsed, not with fear, but with recognition. The elder moved forward, his gait uneven from old wounds, and pressed a gnarled hand against the nearest tree. The bark split beneath his touch, revealing ancient carvings hidden beneath symbols that twisted like living things under the moonlight. Kel's vision blurred as the markings seared themselves into his mind, awakening memories that were not his own. A great howl echoed through time, black-furred alpha standing atop a mountain of bones. The moon red as a fresh wound, hanging low over a battlefield where wolves tore at each other's throats under its cursed light. The blood moon alphas, the elder's voice slithered through Kel's thoughts. Your ancestors, the first true rulers of the night. Kel's claws dug into the soil as another wave of visions struck a betrayal. Silver knives in the dark. The last blood moon alpha falling, his pack slaughtered to the last pup. The council's founding, drenched in stolen power. A growl built in Kel's throat, vibrating through the clearing. The trees trembled. Somewhere in the distance, wolves that had not howled in generations lifted their voices in answer. The elder bared his neck in submission, but his eyes gleamed with vicious satisfaction. He thought, they erased your line, but blood remembers. Kel's transformation back to human form came with a snap of breaking bones. He stood naked amidst the carnage, his skin still steaming, his eyes burning with that unnatural gold. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of the visions. Show me. The elder grinned, teeth yellowed and sharp. Somewhere in the city, the council's high tower shook as if struck by an earthquake. The grand obsidian halls of the supernatural council trembled, as if the earth itself recoiled from their existence. The air smelled of burning incense and fear-thick cloying, clinging to the throats of the assembled leaders like a curse. At the center of the chamber, the High Regent, A vampire whose pale skin had not seen sunlight in 3 centuries clutched the arms of his throne. The reports had come in one after another, entire patrols slaughtered. Their remains torn apart with such brutality that even the oldest among them had turned away in revulsion. The rogue werewolf they had marked for extermination was no mere beast, it was something far worse. A witch, her silver hair matted with sweat, hurled bones onto the marble floor. They cracked apart, each fracture revealing glimpses of the future flames, howling wolves, a throne of skulls drenched in moonlight. She gasped, blood trickling from her nose as the vision overwhelmed her. The Blood Moon Prince? He remembers silence, then panic. The shifter representative, a broad-chested lichen with scars from 100 battles, slammed his fist onto the table. Impossible. We wiped that bloodline out centuries ago. The High Regent's crimson eyes darkened. The memories of that night still haunted him, the betrayal. The screams of dying alphas, the taste of their power as the council consumed it. They had been thorough, they had been merciless, yet somehow one had survived. A messenger burst into the chamber, his face ashen. The western outpost has fallen. The wolves there. They're not fighting him, they're bowing. The word sent a ripple of terror through the room. An alpha's influence spread like a plague, turning even the most loyal packs against their masters. The High Regent rose, his cloak billowing like a storm cloud. Send the Black Fang Legion, every last one, and ready the Silver Sanctum. The witch's head snapped up, her eyes wide with horror. You would unleash that. Even you cannot control. I will burn the world before I let a blood moon take it from us. The High Regent snarled, fangs glinting in the torchlight. Far away, beneath a blood-red moon, Kale stood atop a pile of broken bodies, his golden gaze fixed on the distant spires of the council's stronghold. The wind carried the scent of fear to him, rich and intoxicating. He smiled. The moon hung low and swollen over the ruins of the western outpost, its pale light painting the broken bodies of the council's enforcers in shades of silver and crimson. Kale stood at the center of the carnage, his claws still dripping, his golden eyes scanning the tree line. The wind carried the scent of wolves, many of them, circling, watching. They had come to challenge him. A massive gray-furred werewolf emerged from the shadows first, his muzzle streaked with old scars, his yellowed fangs bared in defiance. Behind him, a dozen others prowled forward, their growls vibrating through the earth. These were no mere rogues. They were a pack, hardened by years of surviving under the council's boot. The gray alpha lunged without warning. Kale met him midair, their collision sending a shockwave through the clearing. Claws tore into flesh, fangs snapped at throats, and the night filled with the sound of ripping muscle and splattering blood. The other wolves circled, waiting to see who would rise. The gray alpha was strong, brutal, relentless, but Kale was something older. A swipe of his claws opened the gray's belly, spilling steaming entrails onto the dirt. The challenger howled, stumbling back, but Kale gave no quarter. He seized the wolf's throat in his jaws and crushed. The crack of bone echoed like thunder. Silence. Kale released the corpse, lifting his bloodied muzzle to the watching wolves. One by one, they lowered themselves bellies to the earth, throats bared in submission, but one refused. A black-furred she-wolf stalked forward, her eyes burning with something beyond fear or obedience. She did not bow, she did not growl. She simply stared as if waiting. Kale tilted his head. Then he shifted back to human form, his body streaked with gore, his voice rough with power. Speak. The she-wolf's form melted into that of a woman, her skin marked with the same dark patterns as her fur. The council is gathering their forces, she said. They will come for you with everything they have. Kel's lips curled. Let them. She studied him a moment longer, then bared her throat at last, not in submission, but in offering. Then let us hunt. The scent of blood had barely faded from the battleground. When the first signs of rebellion began to spread, Kel's new pack moved like shadows through the night, their loyalty secured by the brutal display of his dominance. The black-furred she-wolf, now known only as Varya, stayed close to his side, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had seen the council's cruelty firsthand, had felt the bite of their silver chains, and her hatred ran deeper than most. The forest seemed to breathe with tension. Wolves that had once cowered under the council's rule now gathered in hidden clearings, their eyes gleaming with something long forgotten: hope. But hope was a dangerous thing in a world ruled by fear. Far from the safety of the trees, the council's stronghold buzzed with frantic activity. Vampire sentries patrolled the high walls, their pale faces drawn tight with unease. Witches burned forbidden herbs, their chants twisting through the air like serpents. And in the darkest chambers, where even moonlight dared not reach, the High Regent met with his inner circle. A map lay spread across the obsidian table, marked with the locations of vanished patrols, slaughtered outposts, and most troubling of all, the growing number of packs that had turned their backs on the council. The Regent's claws dug into the wood, splintering it. The Blood Moon Prince rallies them, hissed a witch, her fingers trembling around a blood-filled scrying bowl. Even now more join him. The Regent's crimson eyes darkened. It survived centuries by crushing rebellion before it began. But this was different. This was not just a challenge to his power, it was an unraveling of everything the council had built. A messenger burst into the chamber, his face ashen. The Western clans have refused the summons. They say they will not fight for tyrants. Silence. Then the Regent's snarl split the air. Then they will die with him. Deep in the woods, Kale stood atop a rocky outcrop, the wind carrying the scent of storm and iron. Varya crouched beside him, her ears twitching at distant howls, not of wolves, but of something worse. The council's answer was coming, and the night would run red before it was over. The forest reeked of damp earth and old blood. As Kale's pack gathered in the moonlit clearing, the air hummed with tension, thick enough to choke on. Every wolf stood alert, muscles coiled, ears twitching at the slightest rustle in the underbrush. They were waiting. Then a disturbance. The trees shuddered as a figure emerged from the shadows, flanked by a dozen others. Not wolves, not entirely. Vampires. Their pale skin gleamed like bone under the moonlight, their eyes burning with the same predatory hunger as the wolves they had once hunted. At their head strode a towering figure, his cloak tattered from centuries of battle, his fangs glinting as he bared them not in threat, but in grim acknowledgement. Kale did not move. His golden eyes locked onto the vampire leader, his claws flexing at his sides. The pack behind him growled, hackles raised, teeth bared. The vampire stopped just beyond striking distance. His crimson gaze flickered over the assembled wolves, then settled back on Kale. "The council betrayed us too," he said, his voice like gravel in smoke. Silence. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. The vampires had been the council's enforcers. Their blades and fangs used to keep the other supernaturals in line. But power had shifted. The High Regent had grown paranoid, purging even his own kind. And now, the hunters had become the hunted. Kel's nostrils flared as he scented the truth in the vampire's words, the bitterness, the rage, the desperation. This was no trick. This was survival. Varya stepped forward, her dark eyes narrowed. "Why should we trust you?" The vampire's lips curled, revealing the jagged points of his fangs. "Because the council has already sent the Silver Maw after you." A ripple of unease passed through the wolves. The Silver Maw, legion of cursed beasts, neither wolf nor demon. Their bodies reforged with molten silver and dark magic, the council's last resort. Kale exhaled, slow and deliberate. Then he extended his hand, claws still slick with the blood of his enemies. The vampire clasped it without hesitation. The alliance was sealed in silence. And somewhere in the distance, the first howl of the Silver Maw split the night. The night had grown heavy, the moon swollen and red as an open wound. Kale stood at the edge of an ancient stone circle, his claws digging into the damp earth. The air here was thick with old magic, the kind that slithered beneath the skin and whispered in a language older than time. The vampire lord Draven knelt beside a weathered altar, his pale fingers brushing away centuries of moss to reveal carvings beneath twisting serpents, howling wolves, and a great crimson moon with jagged teeth. "The Blood Moon Prophecy," he murmured, his voice barely louder than the wind. Kel's blood burned as he stared at the markings. They pulsed under his gaze, as if alive, as if waiting. Varya stepped forward, her dark eyes reflecting the moon's eerie glow. "It speaks of a curse," she said, tracing the symbols with a hesitant touch, "and a reckoning." The carvings told a story, one of betrayal. The first Blood Moon Alpha had not simply been killed. He had been cursed. His power had been fractured, his lineage bound, his descendants doomed to forget what they were. The council had not just stolen his throne, they had stolen his legacy. And now the curse was breaking. A low growl rumbled in Kel's chest as the truth settled into his bones. The visions he had seen, the power that surged through him, it was not just his own, it was theirs. The blood of every alpha before him, screaming for vengeance. A howl tore through the night, not from the forest, but from the sky itself. The moon seemed to shudder, its light deepening to a sickly crimson. Draven's fangs gleamed as he smiled, sharp and predatory. "The blood moon rises," he said. And with it, the end of the council's reign. Kel's claws lengthened, his muscles coiling with a power that was no longer just his own. But there's every alpha that had come before, every wolf that had died forgotten. The curse was breaking, and the world would bleed for it. The blood moon hung low in the sky, its crimson light painting the world in shades of violence. Kel's forces gathered at the edge of the Black Fen, a cursed stretch of land where the earth itself whispered of forgotten massacres. The alliance of wolves and vampires stood ready, their eyes reflecting the same hunger for vengeance, for freedom. But something was wrong. Kel's nostrils flared as a new scent cut through the night sour, metallic, laced with deceit. Before he could react, a scream tore through the ranks. One of the vampire lieutenants collapsed, his chest pierced by a silver stake. The wolves nearest him whirled, only to be met with flashing fangs and knives glinting with wolfsbane. The betrayal came swift and brutal. A third of Draven's coven turned on their own, their blades finding throats and hearts with practiced precision. The werewolves who had sworn loyalty to Kale just days before now lunged at their brothers. Their eyes glazed with compulsions older than memory witchcraft, binding oaths, the council's last desperate ploy. Varya moved like shadow and fury, her claws slick with traitor blood, but even she couldn't stop the tide. A dagger grazed her ribs, the wound smoking with poison. Kale roared, the sound shaking the trees. His golden eyes locked onto the source of the treachery, a figure cloaked in tattered gray. Standing atop a rise, their hands weaving spells that slithered through the air like serpents. A witch. One of the council's high circle. She smiled as Kale charged, her lips moving in a silent incantation. The ground beneath him erupted in a geyser of black fire, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The flames licked at his fur, searing flesh from bone, but the pain was nothing compared to the fury. His claws found her throat just as her spell reached its crescendo. The explosion of magic and blood lit up the night. When the smoke cleared, Kale stood alone amidst the carnage, the witch's head dangling from his fist. The surviving traitors froze, their will crumbling with her death. But the damage was done. The alliance was fractured, the council's trap had sprung, and the real war was just beginning. The night had teeth. The crimson moon swelled overhead, its baleful light drenching the battlefield in hues of blood and rust. The air itself trembled with ancient power, thick with the scent of iron and ozone. Kale stood at the center of the carnage, his fur matted with gore, his golden eyes reflecting the hellish glow above. The betrayal had cost them dearly. Bodies littered the Black Fenwolves, vampires, traitors, and loyalists alike, their remains twisted in final agonies. But the dead were the lucky ones. From the shadows of the fen, new horrors emerged. The Silver Maw came first, monstrous abominations of flesh and molten silver. Their maws distended with rows of jagged teeth, their howls like grinding metal. Behind them marched the council's elite guard, vampire knights clad in cursed armor, witch hunters wielding blades of frozen moonlight, and at their center, the High Regent himself, his pale face a mask of cold fury. Kel's remaining forces formed a ragged line at his back. Varya, her side still bleeding from the poisoned dagger, bared her fangs. Draven, his coven halved by betrayal, lifted a sword blackened with old blood. The wolves who still lived gathered close, their eyes fixed on the alpha who had brought them this far. Then the blood moon pulsed. A wave of power crashed through Kel's veins, hotter than fire, sharper than silver. The carvings from the ancient altar flashed behind his eyes. The prophecy, the curse, the truth. This was not just a battle. It was a reckoning. With a roar that shook the earth, Kale charged. The silver maw met him first. He tore through them like parchment, his claws shearing through reinforced hides, his fangs crushing metal and bone alike. One beast lunged, its maw gaping. Kale seized its jaws and ripped it apart down the middle, showering the battlefield in steaming viscera. The vampire knights fell next, their armor useless against the fury of an alpha under the blood moon. Kale moved like a storm, a whirlwind of teeth and claws, every strike leaving another corpse in his wake. The High Regent watched from atop his nightmare steed, his crimson eyes widening as Kale carved a path toward him. For the first time in centuries, fear flickered across his immortal face. The blood moon reached its zenith, and the true war began. The blood moon's crimson light pulsed like a dying heart, casting the battlefield in hues of fire and shadow. Kel's massive form stood silhouetted against the hellish glow, his golden eyes burning with primordial fury. The stench of blood and burning flesh choked the air, the ground slick with the remains of the silver maw. The High Regent's forces recoiled as Kale advanced. His transformation was no longer just physical. His very presence warped reality around him. Shadows clung to his fur like living smoke. The earth cracked beneath his paws. The wind carried his growl like thunder, vibrating through bone and steel alike. A battalion of vampire knights charged, their silver-tipped lances gleaming. Kale moved faster than thought. Its claws tore through armor like parchment, sending limbs and torsos raining down in a grisly storm. One knight swung a blessed broadsword. Kale caught the blade in his jaws and shattered it, the shards embedding in the vampire's screaming face. Witch fire erupted around him, green flames that devoured flesh. Kale barely flinched as the cursed fire licked at his fur. The blood moon's power coursed through him, healing wounds faster than they could be made. He lunged through the flames, seizing the witch who cast them. Her terrified shriek ended abruptly as he crushed her skull between his teeth. The High Regent watched from his nightmare steed, his pale face finally showing fear. He raised a trembling hand, unleashing a wave of dark energy that withered the very air. Kale met it head-on. The two forces collided with a shockwave that flattened trees and sent combatants flying. For the first time in centuries, the High Regent dismounted. His form shimmered, bones cracking as he revealed his true self, the monstrous vampiric abomination with bat-like wings and claws like scimitars. Kale welcomed the challenge with a roar that shook the heavens. The two titans clashed in an explosion of blood and magic. The ground split beneath them. The sky itself seemed to bleed. The blood moon watched, waiting to crown the victor. The battlefield had become an altar of carnage. The blood moon's crimson gaze painted the shattered landscape in hues of fire and shadow, illuminating the two titans locked in their death struggle. The High Regent's monstrous form, a nightmare of leathery wings and elongated fangs, clashed against Kel's primal fury. Their every collision sending shockwaves through the earth. Bones cracked, flesh tore. The air itself trembled with the force of their battle. Remaining council forces, those not already reduced to gore beneath Kel's claws, rallied behind their leader. Vampire knights, their armor slick with blood, formed a desperate phalanx. Witches, their hands blackened from spent magic, wove final desperate spells. But their efforts were futile. Kale moved like a force of nature, his claws carved through the vampire knights as if they were made of parchment, their screams lost beneath the roar of his fury. The witches' spells fizzled against his hide, their power useless against the blood moon's chosen. One by one they fell, their bodies joining the growing mountain of corpses. The High Regent lunged, his talons aiming for Kel's throat. Kale twisted, his jaws clamping around the vampire's wrist. Bone shattered. The Regent howled, his other hand raking across Kel's muzzle, drawing black blood. But Kale did not relent. With a roar that shook the heavens, he wrenched the High Regent's arm free, tendons snapping like overstretched rope. The Regent staggered, his immortal flesh struggling to regenerate, but the blood moon's power had weakened him, its crimson light rejecting his unnatural existence. Kale seized the moment. His next strike tore through the Regent's chest, ribs splintering beneath the force. The vampire's eyes widened, his lips parting in a silent scream as Kel's claws closed around his heart. A final, brutal squeeze. and the High Regent's reign ended in a shower of black blood and crumbling ash. Silence fell. The remaining council forces froze, their will shattered. Some dropped to their knees. Others fled into the night, their cries of terror fading into the distance. Kale stood amidst the devastation, his chest heaving, his golden eyes reflecting the blood moon's dying light. The battle was over. The war was won. The blood moon faded, its crimson glow surrendering to the pale light of dawn. The battlefield lay in ruins, a graveyard of broken bodies and shattered power. The stench of death clung to the air, thick and cloying, but beneath it lingered something else, the metallic temps of change. Kale stood at the center of the carnage, his massive form slowly shrinking back into human shape. His skin was streaked with blood, some his own, most not. His golden eyes, still burning with residual power, scanned the remnants of the battlefield. The surviving members of his pack gathered around him, their heads bowed in reverence. Even the vampires who had fought beside him knelt, their crimson eyes reflecting wary respect. The council was broken. Their strongholds would fall. Their laws would crumble. Their reign of fear had ended in blood and fire. Varya approached, her dark fur matted with gore, her movements stiff from wounds that would take days to heal. She did not bow. She met Kel's gaze as an equal, her own eyes gleaming with something like triumph. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant howls of wolves, not just those who had fought today, but others, hidden in the shadows, now emerging to witness the dawn of a new age. Kale turned his face to the rising sun. The world had changed. It would never be the same again. The ruins of the council's stronghold stood as a monument to fallen tyranny, its blackened spires clawing at the sky like the bones of a dead god. The air still carried the scent of smoke and old blood, but now beneath it was something new, the musk of wolves, the electric hum of magic unchained. Kale walked through the wreckage, his boots crunching on shattered obsidian. The surviving members of the council had either fled or bent the knee, their once proud heads now bowed in submission. The lesser factions, shifters, witches, even the remaining vampires gathered at the edges of the ruined courtyard, their eyes wide with awe and fear. Varya stood at his right, her wounds healed into silvered scars, her gaze sharp as a blade. Draven the vampire lord lingered in the shadows, his crimson eyes watching with something like satisfaction. They had fought, they had bled, and now they would rule. But not as the council had. Kale climbed the steps of the broken dais where the High Regent had once held court. The stone was still stained with blood, both old and new. He turned to face the gathered supernaturals, his golden eyes burning with quiet power. No words were needed. The first wolf stepped forward, a grizzled beta from a conquered pack, and knelt. Then another, and another. The witches followed, their heads bowed, their hands empty of spells. The vampires, ever proud, simply inclined their heads, their fangs hidden. One by one, the factions acknowledged what they had all known from the moment Kale tore out the High Regent's heart. The age of the council was over. The age of the blood moon had begun. And somewhere deep in the forest, a new howl rose to meet the dawn.